Hello friends, another video on our channel, and I'd like to thank you for subscribing. Let's go for another story. Have you ever imagined that the African desert holds secrets that have been passed down through centuries, whispered only to those who are ready to listen? What ethereal figures, the angels of the desert, walked silently among the dunes, guiding peoples and preserving an ancestral wisdom forgotten by time. Today, we'll embark on a journey between the visible and the invisible, exploring symbols, rituals, and stories that reveal ancient connections with other civilizations. Prepare to discover how ancient Africa shaped traditions, inspired prophecies, and left legacies that still resonate in the modern world. Before diving into this mystery, if you're not already subscribed, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're joining us on this ancestral journey. The African desert has always been more than sand and heat. It's a stage for stories that time insists on hiding. Under the relentless sun and the endless sky, civilizations arose that conversed with the divine in absolute silence. Immense dunes hold secrets of peoples who crossed kilometers to follow invisible dreams, guided by the wind. Each stone, each oasis, each shadow carries memories of rituals and encounters with the sacred. And it is in this place where man feels small that the human soul learns to hear the invisible. Historians and archaeologists try to decipher traces of ancient cities buried beneath the sand. But even the most precise excavations fail to touch the living memory of the desert. It holds not only ruins, but also the echo of ancestral voices, of songs and prayers that were never written down. The sandstorms, with their mystical roar, seem to protect what needs to remain hidden. For there, history and legend intertwine, as if they were inseparable. The Sahara, the Niger, the Sahel, each region has its own whisper, its own energy. Time moves differently among these dunes, where days become weeks and memories stretch like shadows. And it is in this infinite terrain that the first accounts of entities of light and wind emerge, the so-called angels of the desert. They appear subtly, almost like a reflection of the sky and the sand, defying human reason and logic. And those who have seen them swear that the desert was never the same after that encounter. No one knows exactly when these accounts began to emerge. Some ancient manuscripts mention travelers who heard songs in the wind before falling asleep under the stars. Others tell of luminous figures appearing among the dunes, silent, observant, like guardians of time. What all these stories have in common is a sense of reverence, that the desert speaks, observes, and chooses, and that listening to its messages requires courage, patience, and an open heart. As humans traversed the desert, they tried to comprehend its vastness, but only those who truly listened to the wind could perceive the signs. The desert is not merely a physical place, but a spiritual portal where past, present, and future intertwine. And even today, under the gaze of scientists, tourists, and adventurers, it continues to hold secrets that defy time. Secrets that are only revealed to those who know how to look beyond the obvious and feel the invisible. And it is at this point, in this moment of expectation, that the next mystery arises: the origin and mythology of the desert angels. Long before books and maps recorded the Sahara, the desert peoples already spoke of entities made of wind and light, who walked between the visible and the invisible. They were the angels of the desert, called by some the children of dust, messengers who guarded secrets of creation and the soul. It is said that they emerged when the world was still young, in the first sandstorms, bringing knowledge of the stars to those who dared to listen. Their stories were passed down orally, from generation to generation, through songs and prayers that mingled with the breath of the wind. For the ancients, they were not distant deities, but guides who revealed invisible paths to those who sought wisdom. Legends say that these angels had no fixed form. Sometimes they were shimmering lights dancing among the dunes. Other times, elongated shadows that disappeared with the wind. Some manuscripts from the Sahel describe human figures with golden eyes, who taught the first sacred rituals, such as reading the stars and interpreting the sounds of the sand. They were, in essence, humanity's first teachers in the art of listening to the invisible. And each story that has survived carries the weight of an ancient secret, which time has tried to erase. For the people of Kemet, the angels of the desert were associated with elements of creation, such as the sun, the wind, and the dust that forms the earth. They represented the union between heaven and earth, the divine and the human. Some traditions said they were protectors of caravans, appearing only to those with purity of heart and courage of spirit. Others claimed that their messages were enigmatic, understood only by those prepared to receive the truth. And so, the myth arose. beings that existed on the border between reality and dream. The oracles and priests of the desert recorded signs, dreams, and omens related to angels. They believed that the first appearance of an angel was always a warning, a call for change or revelation. Stories tell of nights when the wind formed voices, intoning words that no one could fully understand. But those with sensitivity perceived that each sound carried a profound meaning, as if the desert spoke for them. And each encounter reinforced the belief that angels were an essential part of the world's balance. And so, mythology spread across the desert, transforming each oasis, each dune, and each star into silent witnesses of these encounters. The angels of the desert became invisible guardians, bridges between the human and the divine, always present but never fully revealed. They existed to teach, protect, and challenge, reminding men that there are greater forces unseen by the eyes. And it is at this point that the next mystery presents itself: the emergence of the human and spiritual protagonists, those who crossed paths with these ancestral entities. In the heart of the desert emerge the protagonists of this ancient story: the oracles, the priests, and, of course, the angels of light themselves. The oracles were humans sensitive to the messages of the wind, capable of hearing words that others did not perceive. They carried amulets, sacred stones, and ancient scrolls, symbols of a wisdom that spanned generations. The priests were the guardians of tradition, teaching rituals that connected men and spirits, light and sand. And among them all, the angels of light appeared as invisible entities, guiding, testing, and revealing ancient secrets. Each character had a unique role in the desert cycle. The oracle was the messenger, the one who received signs and translated them into words for the community. The priest was the protector, keeping the rituals intact and interpreting the omens of the dunes. And the angels of light were the teachers, existing between reality and myth, always one step ahead, almost untouchable. Together, they formed a balance between the human and the divine, between matter and the invisible. The accounts speak of encounters during sandstorms, when the sun hid and the night seemed eternal. The oracle felt the touch of the wind as if it were an ancient voice, while the priests lit lamps and chanted songs invoking protection. And then, in the quietest moment, angels appeared, beams of light piercing the dust, forming images that seemed alive. The encounters were brief, but etched in the memory of those who witnessed them, forever marking the destiny of caravans and villages. And each experience reinforced the myth that the desert was more than sand. It was a living temple. Even today, it is difficult to separate reality from myth. Some historians describe the protagonists as literary figures, while oral tradition maintains their stories as records of real encounters. But everyone agrees on one thing: the angels of light changed everything around them, illuminating paths, transforming doubts into revelations. The oracle and the priest were instruments of this transformation, humans chosen to perceive what was hidden. And each gesture, each vision, carried a teaching that would transcend time and the dunes. And so, the story of these protagonists prepares us for the next mystery: the first appearance of the desert angels, when humanity finally encounters the divine in a direct way. The story goes that the first apparition occurred on a moonless night, when the desert seemed suspended between silence and eternity. A young oracle walked alone among the dunes, feeling the wind as if it were conscious. Suddenly, the sand began to glow with a faint light, forming figures that moved as if they had a life of their own. And there they were, the angels of the desert, made of light and dust, silent and imposing, revealing that the world had more layers than one could imagine. The oracle could hardly believe it, but felt a profound peace, as if he had been touched by the very essence of the universe. The entities did not speak in human words, but the young man heard clear messages in his heart. Each gesture, each movement, each glimmer of light conveyed wisdom, stories of forgotten times, and warnings about the future. He realized that the desert was not merely a physical space, but a veil between the visible and the invisible, where truth manifested itself in unexpected ways. And even when the vision faded, the feeling remained, marked like an eternal seal in the oracle's memory. It was there that the connection between the human and the divine began, sealed by the wind and the sand. Other accounts emerge from neighboring villages, where children and travelers felt subtle presences during sandstorms. They described lights dancing among the dunes, forming patterns reminiscent of unknown constellations. Some scholars call this a mirage or natural phenomenon, but the elders know they are signs from angels, manifesting themselves to those who can still see the invisible. And each account reinforces the idea that the desert is an open book, written in symbols and winds, waiting to be read by attentive eyes. Each apparition is a bridge, connecting the ancestral past to the silent present of the desert. During these early appearances, the first records of interactions between humans and angels also emerged. The oracle learned to interpret the movements of the sand, the brilliance of the light, and the sounds of the wind as coded messages. The priest, in turn, began to record signs and rituals, creating a system of protection and learning for the community. Each encounter was an opportunity to understand the world more deeply, revealing that the invisible governs the visible. And these initial experiences created the foundation for the entire spiritual tradition that would be passed down through the centuries. And so, the first appearance was not just an isolated event, but the beginning of an ongoing connection that would guide the chosen ones of the desert and teach humans to listen to the voice of the wind. Each new night, the sand seemed to whisper again, reminding them that the desert still holds secrets about to be revealed. And it is at this point that the next topic emerges: ancestral rituals and beliefs, showing how humans came to interact with and honor these visitors of light. The desert peoples developed rituals to connect with the angels of light and the spirit of the dunes. Through fasting, chanting, and meditation, they sought to understand the invisible signs carried by the wind. Every gesture had meaning: lighting fires at sunset, drawing symbols in the sand, chanting sacred words that echoed like waves of energy. And these were not merely religious traditions, but forms of dialogue with the universe, teaching humanity to hear beyond what the eyes can see. The sand became an altar, the wind a messenger, and the night a silent witness to these practices. The oracles were the masters of these rituals, guiding the chosen ones to interpret the signs that appeared. The priest taught the meaning of each symbol, each hand position, each pattern of light and shadow. The people learned that the connection with angels was not a privilege, but a skill cultivated with patience and reverence. The rituals took place in lunar cycles and during stormy periods, times when the invisible seemed closer. And each ceremony reinforced the idea that the desert is a place of profound spiritual learning. Some rituals involved symbolic offerings: grains, stones, or water from the oasis, deposited in special places. It was a way of giving thanks and receiving guidance for the community, preserving the balance between the human and the divine. The chants were accompanied by rudimentary instruments, but each sound seemed to amplify the presence of angels, transforming the desert into a living sanctuary. The traditions also taught about respect for nature and ancestral memory, reminding us that everything is connected. And with each generation, the teachings were passed down as a sacred, invisible but powerful inheritance. Dreams were also considered part of these rituals, especially for the oracles. During long meditations, messages and visions would emerge like fleeting lights among the dunes. Each vision had multiple interpretations, and it was up to the chosen one to decipher what it meant for him and his village. It was a process of constant learning, where the mystical and the practical intertwined to create wisdom. And these experiences helped keep the memory of the desert angels alive, even in times of silence and oblivion. Thus, ancestral rituals and beliefs were not merely ceremonies. They were portals to the invisible, bridges between the human and the divine. Each gesture, each sound, each shimmering light reinforced the presence of angels and taught the path of deep listening. And it is at this point that the desert begins to reveal its hidden symbols, bringing the next mystery: hidden symbols and spiritual language. In the silence of the desert, each element carried a secret meaning, understood only by the initiated. The horizon stone, an isolated rock luminous at dusk, was considered a portal to the invisible. The wind, blowing between the dunes, became a messenger, carrying signs that only a prepared heart could decipher. The light reflected on the sand created patterns that functioned as ancient codes, a language between humans and angels. And those who could read these symbols understood messages about destiny, balance, and the flow of the universe. The angels of the desert were the guardians of this silent language. They taught that every gesture, every sound of the wind, every glint in the sand could be read as words. The priests recorded these symbols on parchment and sculptures, preserving memories that could be interpreted by future generations. Each sign was carefully studied, each pattern of light analyzed, as if the desert spoke directly to the chosen ones. And the interpretation was not literal, but spiritual, teaching that the invisible manifests itself in subtle ways, often imperceptible to ordinary eyes. Thus, the language of the desert became a bridge between the human and the divine, a key to understanding the mysteries that the angels revealed. and each lesson reinforced respect for the signs that the wind carried. The horizon stone also served as a marker of time and sacred space. Oracles and priests gathered in its shadows, meditating and observing how the light moved, interpreting messages that guided important decisions. It was a moment when the human became an instrument of the divine, connected to the flow of the universe. And each symbol learned revealed more than mystical techniques. It was an invitation to listen to the world deeply and attentively. The desert, therefore, transformed into an open book, but one that could only be read by those who were ready to see beyond the obvious. Thus, symbols and spiritual language created a permanent link between humans and desert angels. They taught that every step, every gesture, every breath of wind had value and could contain ancestral messages. And it is at this point that the story moves on to the next mystery: ancient texts and manuscripts, revealing how these messages were recorded to survive the test of time. Amidst the heat and dust, scrolls and manuscripts emerged, recording encounters with the angels of the desert. Timbuktu, Aksum, and other sacred cities held hidden libraries, full of secrets about light, wind, and ancestral symbols. These texts were written in almost forgotten languages, combining poetry, drawing, and codes that only the initiated understood. They were not merely stories, but spiritual maps, indicating how to navigate the inner and outer desert with wisdom. And each page, each ink, and each symbol carried the energy of those who walked before, connected to the invisible. The manuscripts told of nights when the wind seemed to speak, of lights piercing the dunes, and of figures guiding travelers. Some records describe teachings on the balance between natural and spiritual forces, on how to listen to the desert and interpret its signs. And even the most enigmatic accounts reveal that the angels of the desert were masters of invisible communication, capable of teaching without a single word. The scholars who found these scrolls realized that there were layers of meaning, as if each reader unlocked a new message. And each manuscript reinforced the idea that the desert was a sacred school, where time and memory intertwined. Some pages speak of encounters that shaped the caravan culture, of teachings that preserved harmony among the peoples of the Sahel. Others mention luminous symbols that appeared in the night skies, accompanying rituals and ceremonies, a language shared between heaven and earth. These ancient texts were not merely historical records, but spiritual guides, instructions for understanding the invisible. And each archaeological discovery shows that, despite the centuries and storms, the memory of the desert angels has resisted oblivion. What remains is a sense of reverence, the impression that each page still pulsates with living energy. The manuscripts also reveal that the transmission of knowledge was not limited to writing. Scholars, oracles, and priests used symbols, music, and dance to teach subsequent generations. It was a holistic learning process that united reason, intuition, and spirituality, keeping the connection with angels alive. And even with attempts to conceal or destroy these records, the desert continued to protect its stories, like a silent guardian. Thus, the ancient texts and manuscripts formed the bridge between mystical encounters and the preservation of the legacy for modern times. And it is at this point that the narrative moves on to the next mystery: archaeological discoveries and unexplained mysteries, revealing tangible signs of the presence of the desert angels. Excavations in the dunes have revealed ancient ruins, forgotten temples, and inscriptions that defy explanation. Some stones show markings reminiscent of unknown constellations, as if the builders had learned from the heavens themselves. And these were not merely static records. Some travelers reported that, on certain nights, the inscriptions glowed, emitting a type of light that no one can explain. Archaeologists are divided between describing natural phenomena or recognizing that something beyond human comprehension was present. The desert seemed to hold tangible and invisible secrets, revealing clues to the presence of angels among humans and sand. Among the ruins, traces of altars and platforms emerge, where people performed rituals linked to winds, lights, and meditations. These places were carefully aligned with the movement of the sun and stars, suggesting advanced astronomical knowledge. The angels of the desert not only inspired but perhaps guided the construction of sacred spaces, creating bridges between the physical and spiritual realms. And even when forgotten, the structures retain an energy that attracts those seeking to understand the invisible. The desert, therefore, becomes a living museum, guarding mysteries that defy science and perception. Some luminous phenomena observed by researchers recall ancient accounts of light figures among the dunes. Sometimes, the sand seems to shimmer for no apparent reason, as if charged with residual energy. Witnesses claim that subtle sounds accompany these glows, like whispers of angels, creating an experience that blends archaeology and spirituality. It is impossible to ignore the feeling that there is something that transcends time, something that connects the past to the present through invisible signs. And each discovery reinforces the notion that the desert holds knowledge that we are still far from fully understanding. Furthermore, inscriptions and symbols found on ancient stones contain repetitive patterns reminiscent of alphabets or codes. Oracles interpret these markings as messages left by angels, directed to humans seeking wisdom. Even without a definitive translation, the intention to record spiritual knowledge is clear, to preserve a link between the visible and the invisible. And each visit to these sacred places is like touching a fragment of living memory, feeling the presence of those who walked before. And so, the mysteries of the desert continue to provoke us, preparing the ground for connections with other ancient cultures. The desert angels did not remain isolated. Their stories echoed in other ancient civilizations. In Kemet, for example, records speak of entities of light and wind that guided priests, very similar to the African angels of the Sahel. Caravans crossing the desert spread these traditions, leaving traces in distant villages and temples. Thus, patterns of symbols and rituals appeared in places separated by time and space, as if there were a universal language of the invisible. The desert wind became a bridge, carrying ancestral memories to cultures that would otherwise never have met. Oracles and priests perceived that certain stars and constellations held the same meanings in distant regions. It was as if the angels of the desert had created a global code, linking peoples in reverence to the cosmos. Oracles and priests perceived that certain stars and constellations held the same meanings in distant regions. It was as if the angels of the desert had created a global code, linking peoples in reverence to the cosmos. Some historians suggest that this explains similarities between certain rituals of the Sahel, the Nile, and even the ancient Mediterranean. And the signs of the angels were not only in stories, but also in artifacts, constructions, and star maps scattered throughout these cultures. Each connection revealed that ancestral African wisdom was more influential than modern history usually admits. Among the peoples of the Sahel, rituals and beliefs about luminous entities have been preserved for centuries. Oral tradition has kept alive messages about respect for the wind, the sand, and the sunlight. Travelers noted striking similarities in Kemet and beyond, as if the messages of angels had crossed borders unhindered. It was a testament to the fact that African spiritual knowledge resonated throughout the world, shaping distant practices and beliefs. And this perception reinforced the idea that the invisible transcends physical and temporal boundaries. Even forgotten manuscripts in ancient libraries show parallels between desert symbols and esoteric alphabets from other regions. Oracles and scholars interpret this as proof of a shared legacy, a collective memory of invisible wisdom. And each connection discovered reveals that the desert angels were not merely local, but elements of a global spiritual fabric, invisible yet present. This network of influences shows that the teachings of the angels helped shape cultures and religions far beyond the Sahel. And it is at this point that the narrative leads us to the conflicts and challenges faced by those who tried to guard these secrets. The desert and its angels continue to teach us that true knowledge knows no bounds. And it is from these ancient connections that the first conflicts and challenges arise, when human attempts seek to hide or distort these truths. But these challenges only reinforce the importance of protecting, understanding, and honoring the invisible legacy. And it is at this point that we move on to the next topic: conflicts and challenges faced. The desert angels and human guardians faced constant challenges to protect their secrets. Caravans were attacked, temples looted, and ancient manuscripts threatened by invaders who did not understand their importance. Even so, the oracles and priests found ways to hide symbols, transfer knowledge orally, and keep the rituals alive. Each threat increased the responsibility of those chosen by the desert, showing that protecting the invisible required courage and wisdom. The wind and sand became allies, camouflaging signs and creating invisible barriers for the curious. Internal conflicts also arose. Some humans doubted the angels' messages, while others sought power and control over sacred knowledge. Oracles needed to discern between those who were prepared to learn and those who might corrupt the teachings. These challenges demanded balance, patience, and a deep understanding of spirituality, so that the tradition would not be lost or distorted. And each obstacle reinforced the idea that true knowledge always encounters resistance, but survives for the worthy. The desert thus became a testing ground, where the invisible and the human met in constant tension. Furthermore, Climate change, storms, and natural uncertainties tested the resilience of the communities. Rituals needed to adapt, and oracles learned to interpret unexpected signs, maintaining communication with the angels. It was a reminder that the desert not only taught but also challenged, demanding continuous attention and respect. Each difficulty became part of the learning process, strengthening the guardians of ancestral wisdom. And so, the challenges shaped the tradition, making it deeper and more resilient to time. Some conflicts became legends, stories of dangerous encounters, of beings who tested the courage of oracles and priests. These accounts emphasize that accessing the invisible requires preparation, faith, and a pure heart. And even in the face of danger and uncertainty, the connection with the angels of the desert remained, sublime and transformative. Each struggle reinforced the importance of protecting the spiritual legacy, keeping alive the teachings of the wind, the sand, and the light. And so, the final revelations emerge about the impact and legacy of these sacred encounters. The challenges faced by humans and desert angels created a legacy of resilience and wisdom. They showed that true knowledge needs to be guarded with courage and transmitted with care. And it is from these invisible battles that the next topic leads us to the final revelations and reflections on the African legacy. Each obstacle overcome strengthened the bond between the visible and the invisible, between the human and the divine. And it is at this point that the desert begins to speak of its lasting influence on the modern world. The legacy of desert angels and human guardians transcends time, reaching our present day. Ancient rituals, symbols, and stories still influence spiritual practices in various regions of Africa and the world. The connection between light, wind, and wisdom shows that invisible knowledge shapes cultures, beliefs, and even contemporary art forms. What seemed forgotten by official narratives reveals itself to be alive, reminding us that African ancestry continues to pulsate in the sands of time. And each symbol, each ritualistic gesture, carries echoes of a history that can still be unveiled. Ancestral learning teaches about respect for nature, the elements, and the invisible forces that surround us. Even in modern times, the wind that crosses the desert seems to whisper lessons about patience, observation, and reverence. Ancient oracles and priests bequeathed us tools to hear the invisible and interpret signs that transcend reason. And the angels of the desert remain as symbolic guardians, reminding us that there is always something deeper to be perceived beyond the material world. Each teaching reinforces the importance of keeping alive the spiritual and cultural memory of ancestral Africa. The stories of desert angels inspire not only faith, but also intellectual curiosity and artistic sensitivity. Contemporary music, dances, and paintings carry traces of these mystical encounters and reverence for natural forces. The African legacy manifests itself in symbols, metaphors, and ethical values that continue to influence societies. It is a reminder that ancient knowledge does not disappear, it only transforms, like sand that the wind continually molds. And each reflection invites us to look to the past with attentive eyes and an open heart, seeking to learn from our ancestors. The influence of desert angels is also revealed in oral traditions, which continue to cross generations. Stories passed down from father to son keep alive the memory of the connection between the human and the divine. These narratives are not just legends, but bridges between the ancestral past and the modern understanding of the spiritual world. And by understanding these connections, we can perceive the depth of African culture and its role in the formation of global civilizations. Each revelation reminds us that the invisible has a voice and that African ancestry still whispers its secrets. In the depths of the desert, communities performed rituals that connected the human to the invisible. In the twilight, circular dances, chants, and movements of the sand created a bridge to the spiritual world. Priests and oracles taught that each gesture had a purpose, to attract guidance, protection, and reveal ancestral secrets. These ceremonies were moments of intense concentration, where the wind and light became sacred allies of the participants. And those who participated felt that the angels of the desert watched and guided each step, revealing subtle signs and hidden teachings. Each ritual was carefully planned to coincide with lunar phases, stellar alignments, and changes in wind. Sacred objects, amulets, and symbols painted in the sand or on the skin were used to amplify the invisible energy. The sound of the drums and chanting was not just music, it was spiritual language, transmitting messages that the desert recognized. And those initiated learned to interpret signs of light, wind, and sand, deciphering what ordinary eyes could not see. The ceremony ended in profound silence, when everyone felt the presence of the invisible and the strength of the ancestral legacy. These rituals also served to instruct young people about the codes of the desert and the paths of knowledge. Each gesture, each word, each symbol transmitted was a lesson in balance, patience, and respect for the unknown. The ceremony was not just a celebration, but a school of spirituality, where body, mind, and spirit connected with angels. And even the simplest details carried meaning. A stone, a breeze, or a ray of light could contain profound teachings. The desert became stage and temple, and the participants, guardians of an invisible wisdom that transcended generations. Over time, some ceremonies became legendary, recounted in manuscripts and oral histories, preserving the teachings of the angels. Each ritual left an invisible mark on the site, like a spiritual signature perceived only by the attentive. And the angels of the desert continued to guide movements and decisions, keeping the tradition and the connection with the sacred alive. The ceremonies revealed that wisdom was not merely theoretical, but practical, lived, felt, and shared with profound respect. And so, the desert taught that each encounter with the invisible was an opportunity for transformation and continuous learning. These special rituals also served to strengthen the community, reminding them that knowledge and spirituality were shared. And even when secrets needed to be protected, the ritual remained a bridge between the human and the divine. The desert, then, became not only a place of testing and learning, but a sanctuary of memories and spiritual experiences. Each ceremony was a dance between the visible and the invisible, a silent dialogue that echoed in everyone's soul. And from this point, the narrative leads us to the next mystery: initiation and transmission of wisdom. In the heart of the desert, initiates were guided by masters and priests on journeys that combined observation, silence, and perception. Each step, each gesture, and each challenge taught something about the invisible and the sacred, preparing the initiate to hear the angels of the desert. Wisdom was not only transmitted through words, but through experiences, symbols, rituals, and contact with the spiritual environment. The young people learned to recognize signs in the sand, interpret lights in the sky, and listen to the wind as if it were a living language. And upon completing their initiation, they felt they were part of an ancient lineage, connected to centuries of preserved knowledge. The initiation process included tests of patience, courage, and spiritual sensitivity, shaping character and perception. Oracles taught that only those who were prepared could understand the message of the angels, ensuring that the legacy would be preserved. Each teaching was carefully transmitted, often symbolically, so that the initiate would develop intuition and respect. And each experience was recorded in memory, becoming part of a living history that would span generations. The desert, with its immensity and silence, was both teacher and witness, observing each step of the initiation with silent attention. The transmission of wisdom also involved art, music, and visual symbols, a language that time cannot erase. Initiates learned to use bodily memory and the senses to understand the invisible world. And each ritualistic gesture, each dance, and each song carried layers of knowledge that connected past and present. It was a way to ensure that the secrets of the desert remained alive, even in times of change and challenge. And so, the spiritual lineage strengthened, preparing new guardians of ancestral memory. Some initiates shared their learnings with wider communities, transmitting only what was safe and useful. Others remained silent, guarding mysteries that could only be revealed to those who were ready. This selective transmission reinforced the importance of responsibility, respect, and discernment in handling invisible wisdom. And each new initiate became a link in the ancestral chain, connecting past, present, and future through spiritual knowledge. And it is from this point that we move on to the next topic: occult symbolism and secret languages. Among the dunes, symbols etched into stones and sand carried meanings understood only by the initiated. Each geometric shape, each line, and each curve told stories of encounters with the angels of the desert, a code between the human and the invisible. Secret languages also appeared in chants, dances, and gestures, revealing hidden instructions and messages to those who knew how to interpret them. The wind seemed to amplify these messages, making the invisible perceptible to the attentive, like a whisper that travels through time. And each symbol concealed layers of knowledge, waiting for the right gaze to decipher it. Some symbols indicated protection, others taught about balance, respect for nature, and alignment with the elements. Oracles and masters instructed initiates on how to recognize and use these languages, preserving secrets and guiding the spiritual path. The complexity of the messages showed that each mark had multiple meanings, depending on the context and the perception of the observer. It was a way to ensure that only those with discernment, patience, and reverence could understand the knowledge. And so, the desert became a living book, written with wind, sand, and light, awaiting the attentive eyes of future guardians. Attentive eyes of future guardians. These codes also serve to record important events, apparitions, and discoveries, functioning as ancestral memory. Manuscripts and stones held information about luminous phenomena, spiritual encounters, and sacred rituals. And even though many signs remained incomprehensible, they created an invisible network of communication between generations. The hidden symbolism reminded everyone that knowledge is not only what we see, but what we feel, interpret, and respect. And the journey now leads us to explore the elements of nature as spiritual portals, the next topic. The desert was not merely a backdrop, it was a living temple, and its elements, portals to the invisible. The wind carried messages, the movement of the sand held stories, and the light of the sun and moon revealed signs to the attentive. Oracles and initiates learned to interpret these elements as guides, a subtle language that connected the human and the divine. Isolated trees, rocks, and caves were used as places for meditation and observation, marking meeting points with the invisible. The rare water found in oases was sacred, representing purification and renewal of the spirit. Even the silence of the desert had meaning. Moments without sound were understood as opportunities to hear whispers from beyond. Each element was part of a great spiritual code that the angels of the desert left to guide humans. And those who learned to listen to the wind, feel the sand, and interpret the light could perceive messages that few could understand. The study of and interaction with these elements were essential for performing rituals and ceremonies correctly. Synchronization with the movement of nature ensured that teachings were transmitted with precision and respect. Oracles taught that ignoring these signs meant losing contact with the invisible and compromising the protection and guidance of the angels. And each element became a silent teacher, revealing lessons about patience, perception, and spiritual connection. And so, the elements of nature formed an invisible bridge, connecting the present with the ancestral wisdom of the desert. Furthermore, natural phenomena, such as sandstorms or strange glows in the sky, were interpreted as warnings or special messages. Initiates learned to recognize when an event was merely natural and when it carried spiritual significance. Every detail of the environment was studied, understood, and used to strengthen the bond with the angels. And the continuous interaction with the elements transformed the desert into a living school, shaping the perception and sensitivity of the guardians. And it is at this point that we move on to the next topic: prophecies and divine messages. The angels of the desert not only guided but also transmitted prophecies to those who were attentive. Divine messages appeared in dreams, sudden winds, and unexpected glimmers in the sand, signs that foretold future changes and challenges. Oracles and initiates learned to interpret these signs, transforming visions and omens into practical and spiritual instructions. Each prophecy was an invitation to act with wisdom, balance, and respect for the sacred, avoiding imbalances in the human and spiritual worlds. And those who knew how to listen understood that time and destiny were woven by invisible, yet tangible, forces. Some messages revealed transformations within the community, while others warned of dangers that would cross borders. The study of the stars, the wind, and the sand allowed for the deciphering of patterns, revealing lessons that span generations. Many ancient records show that these prophecies influenced political decisions, rituals, and even caravan routes in the desert. It was as if the desert had a memory, and the angels were messengers of this ancestral and living wisdom. And each prophecy reinforced the idea that the invisible always finds ways to communicate with those prepared to listen. Prophecies were also transmitted orally, using metaphors and symbols, ensuring that only the initiated fully understood them. This care protected the teachings and created a deep bond between those who received the message and the spiritual world. Correct interpretation required study, observation, and sensitivity, teaching that knowledge is not immediate, but cultivated. And each fulfilled prophecy reinforced reverence for the angels of the desert and the wisdom that has endured for centuries. It was a reminder that ancient African history holds lessons for the present, if we are attentive enough to listen. Beyond predictions, some divine messages indicated paths for spiritual growth and community protection. Oracles taught that listening to the signs was as important as correctly interpreting the symbols and gestures. And even seemingly insignificant events could carry profound meanings if viewed with prepared eyes. Each prophecy connected past, present, and future, keeping alive the spiritual and cultural legacy of the desert. Not everyone was destined to know the mysteries of the desert. Only the chosen ones received the angels' trust. These guardians learned to protect symbols, rituals, and prophecies, becoming living bridges between the human and the divine. Secrecy was vital. Premature revelation could corrupt knowledge and disrupt spiritual harmony. And those selected underwent trials, teachings, and initiations to prove courage, discernment, and reverence. Thus, each chosen one carried not only ancient knowledge but also an immense responsibility before the community and the unseen. The training included meditation, observation of nature, and the practice of rituals in absolute silence. It was necessary to learn to listen to the wind, the sand, and the desert light as if they were silent masters. Each gesture, each word, and each symbol learned became part of a spiritual arsenal, an invisible shield against ignorance and profanation. The community trusted the chosen ones to keep the tradition alive, while the angels of the desert provided guidance and protection. And each guardian knew that their role was fundamental to the perpetuation of ancestral wisdom, even when no one else understood. Some chosen individuals dedicated their lives to recording events, encounters, and signs, creating invisible archives of knowledge. Others acted as mentors, slowly passing on the secrets to the next generation of initiates. The desert became a safe space where ancestral memory could be preserved against invasions and forgetfulness. And each action of the chosen ones was carried out with discipline, humility, and spiritual connection, keeping the sacred legacy intact. Thus, the protection of knowledge became not only a mission but a form of continuous dialogue with the invisible. These guardians also faced external challenges, such as invaders or curious individuals who did not understand the value of knowledge. Therefore, discretion was essential. Many messages and signs could only be interpreted by the most prepared initiates. Secrecy maintained the purity of the teachings, ensuring that the wisdom of the desert angels remained alive. And each difficulty faced reinforced the courage, perception, and fidelity of those chosen to the ancestral tradition. Even for the chosen few, the desert still concealed phenomena that defied human explanation. Sudden lights, ethereal forms, and sounds that seemed to come from nowhere emerged among silent dunes, as if the desert itself breathed secrets. Some accounts spoke of luminous figures walking among travelers, guarding ancient paths and offering signs to those who knew how to interpret them. These phenomena were both frightening and revered, reminding us that the invisible is always present, but not always understood. And each experience reinforced that there were dimensions of the desert that only the attentive could perceive, keeping the mystery alive. The elders taught that one should not fear the inexplicable, but study it, observe it, and learn from it. Some apparitions repeated themselves in patterns, indicating messages or warnings about future events. More sensitive initiates could feel presences and hear whispers that guided decisions and sacred rituals. And so, the desert became a living space, where the supernatural and the natural coexisted in delicate harmony. Each inexplicable phenomenon became a lesson in respect, patience, and reverence for the unknown. Many of these experiences were recorded in ancient manuscripts and passed down orally, preserving the mysteries for future generations. What was supernatural to some was learning and proof of spiritual connection for others. And each encounter with the inexplicable strengthened the bond between humans and the angels of the desert, consolidating traditions and ancestral wisdom. Even without complete answers, the mystery stimulated curiosity, imagination, and respect for the invisible. The angels of the desert did not remain isolated. Their stories and symbols resonated with other ancient cultures. Whether merchant, traveler, or messenger, each carried fragments of African wisdom to distant lands, creating invisible bridges between civilizations. Some symbols found in Egyptian, Mesopotamian, or African manuscripts showed similarities that intrigued scholars and guardians of knowledge. And each connection revealed that what seemed local or isolated was, in fact, part of a larger spiritual and cultural network. The desert, silent and vast, held stories of encounters, exchanges, and influences that spanned continents and centuries. African rituals and spiritual practices had counterparts in distant regions, revealing exchanges that defy official history. Desert angels, in some way, connected these places, inspiring wisdom, protection, and universal signs. Some studies suggest that astronomy, symbolism, and certain myths were influenced by these ancient African connections. And each artifact, each symbol or lost narrative points to an invisible network of knowledge and spirituality. These connections remind us that human history is intertwined, and that ancient Africa was a beacon and guardian of many universal mysteries. Even when some of these connections were forgotten or distorted, echoes of African wisdom persisted. Oracles and initiates recognized similar signs in distant lands, reinforcing the universality of spirituality and symbolism. And the journey of the desert angels to other cultures was not only physical but also spiritual, transmitting teachings that transcend generations. Each archaeological discovery or ancient account confirms that ancient African knowledge had a profound and lasting impact on the world. The teachings and mysteries of the desert angels still resonate in the modern world, even if many do not realize it. Ancestral symbols, rituals, and stories continue to influence spiritual, cultural, and artistic practices, connecting past and present. The wisdom of the desert reminds us that there is more to life than what is visible. Patience, respect, balance, and perception of the invisible. Each preserved tradition and each ancient account reinforces the importance of valuing ancestry and understanding the depth of African history. And in reflecting on these legacies, we realize that the contemporary world still carries invisible marks of the connection with the sacred and the desert angels. Studying these legacies allows us to learn about tolerance, harmony with nature, and an understanding of universal spirituality. Ancestral practices influence even science, philosophy, and art, showing that ancient wisdom is not lost, only veiled. And those who seek knowledge can find inspiration in symbols, stories, and rituals, rescuing the memory of forgotten civilizations. The journey of the desert angels teaches us that the invisible is as real as the tangible, and that the African legacy still pulsates in our days. And so, history continues to guide us, reminding us that knowledge, when protected and transmitted, is never lost. The final reflection invites each viewer to value ancestry, observe invisible signs, and realize that the African legacy is universal. Even in modern times, we learn that respect, spiritual connection, and ancient wisdom can transform our worldview, and that each culture, symbol, and ritual carries a living memory that, when studied, teaches us about humanity, balance, and transcendence. The desert, the angels, and the ancient guardians remind us that the past is not just history, but a guide for the present and the future. And by keeping curiosity and reverence alive, everyone can continue to discover the secrets that official history has often forgotten to tell. As the sun sets over the dunes, we realize that the angels of the desert remain present, even invisible to the common eye. Each symbol, each ritual, and each message that has traversed centuries reminds us that ancestral African wisdom still pulsates in our modern world. Reflecting on these mysteries invites us to respect the past, understand the invisible, and recognize that true knowledge is eternal and shared. The desert remains a silent guardian, and each story, each prophecy, and each secret connects us to a profound spiritual lineage. If you wish to continue uncovering the secrets of ancient African civilizations, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss the next ancestral stories.